On the edge of the town, an army post, looking exactly as any schoolboy would expect a frontier fort to look. At first, it looks like a traditional Irish scene, a small village set in rolling green country. It's when you get closer, you start to spot the difference. On the edge of the town, an army post, looking exactly as any schoolboy would expect a frontier fort to look. Soldiers on the frontier always hope for better living conditions. The tradition isn't lost here, although para-engineers are making the effort to clear and rebuild the area to produce more comfort. It isn't very easy. And while they do this, the real life and death of the frontier post goes on. Of the 28 soldiers and police killed in this company area, 17 have died in the town square or the streets around it. Each black dot here shows a provisional IRA firing position.
Emerson, Lake, and Palmer and fanfare for the common man. At 5, the Electric Light Orchestra, Phone Line. 4, Stranglers and Peaches. 3, Queen, Loverboy. And 2, Eagles, Hotel, California. The Sex Pistols' current record, God Save the Queen, is at number 1 of the Capitol headline today. But the IBA, which administers the Broadcasting Act, has advised us that particularly at this time, this record is likely to cause offense to a number of our listeners, and have asked us not to play it in our normal programming. However, We will be playing this record with the authorities' approval at 7:30 p.m. tonight on Brian Wolf's Open Line, and we'll welcome your views about the punk rock phenomenon, which this is part of.
Are you honest?
Yes, I am, very.
I think you're trying to shock people.
I don't give a what you think. I know what I think, and that's all that counts to me. I don't try and impress anybody but myself.
Why all the fuss then? Why dress up? Why
Dress up
famous
for
language?
What? Dress up what?
Dye your hair?
So what? Am I not entitled to do what I want with my own body? I think I am. That's all that counts.
Bollocks you must have been proud of and happy with at the time.
It was fine for then, but so what? Times move on. You cannot live in the past. Only a fool looks back to last year or the year before. Punk became like fascist. It has to be this way or else.
But didn't you dictate that to some extent?
No, I did not. I've always said music should be many attitudes. All are tolerable. It becomes intolerable when one particular form takes over and obliterates the rest. That is wrong.
I've had a concern lest the permanent structure of government becomes so big that it would become beyond the control of Congress and beyond the will of the people. And I have believed that this is a problem that crosses party lines. I've seen an interesting development down through the years. When I first suggested the danger of government control inherent in so many federal handouts, there were people who denied vehemently that any such thing could ever take place. And yet, before too long, the same people were saying, what's wrong with government control? And in the recent days, we've heard representatives in the higher echelons of government ask us, well, are you afraid of your own government? Well, to tell you the truth, I am. And all of us should be. And I speak not in a partisan sense of an administration or individuals. I'm talking of the institution of government. Wasn't this the admonition of the Founding Fathers, that government tends to grow, to take on power, until freedom eventually is lost? The fact is, and we can't escape it, only government is capable of tyranny. Now, I realize this is a controversial subject, particularly as we approach an election year. But then if you didn't take up things that were controversial, you'd never talk at all. In 1772, the Boston Committee of Correspondence proclaimed the right to life, liberty, and property. 2 years later, in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress declared that Americans were entitled to life, liberty, and property. In June of 1776, the Virginia Bill of Rights asserted that all men were equally free and independent, with the means of possessing and the right to possess and acquire property. And 3 weeks later came the Declaration of Independence, a bloody war, victory, and then a new nation which would be based on a Constitution and a Bill of Rights. Life, liberty, and property had become life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And 70 years would go by before England's Lord Acton would comment on the task of these men and what they had accomplished with this document. He would say they had solved two problems which had heretofore baffled the most enlightened nations. They had prodigiously increased the power of the national government and had founded it on the principle of equality without surrendering the security for freedom and property. And it's true. Our Constitution is a contract guaranteeing the most limited and equitable government in the long history of man's relation to man. Now, however, while the national power is prodigious, what has happened to security for freedom and our right to the ownership of the fruit of our toil? The French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville 100 years ago said the end of freedom comes when the party in power learns it can perpetuate itself through taxation. Well, what does happen to freedom when the executive branch of government can use the money taken from the people in order to coerce the people? A foolish fear? Representative Glenn Andrews introduced an amendment to the poverty program on the floor of Congress. It is almost inconceivable that such an amendment would be required. It is even more inconceivable that the amendment was overwhelmingly repudiated and defeated. It was a simple amendment that would prohibit poverty funds from being used for political purposes. Make no mistake about it. The party in power has legislated into existence a $1.8 billion campaign fund for 1966.
In this country has widened substantially. How can she say at the end of her chapter of British politics that she can justify many people in a constituency such as mine being relatively much poorer off, much less well housed, and much less well provided than it was in 1979? Surely she accepts that is not a record that she or any Prime Minister can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is a liberal policy. Yes, it came out, he didn't intend it to, but he did. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. The Prime Minister is aware that I detest every single one of her domestic policies and I've never had that.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, so long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
The Soviet Union was in big trouble by the 1990s. The country had managed to keep politicians scared of even daring to mention independence in the past. Now there were strong independence movements, and the press were allowed to criticise the government freely. In August 1991, the August coup sprung up from the military and hardline communist politicians. Tanks rolled into Moscow and surrounded the Russian White House, the government building that the President of Russia works in. The coup aims to take the more liberal politicians out of power and to preserve the communism that the nation was founded on. This angered a sizable amount of the Russian population, who rioted and protested for the coup to end. Even the Russian army and air force had factions of resistance, who defended the White House from siege. However, the entire Union had been shaken by the coup. Any idea that the Soviets had control over their government was long gone. Several parts of the Union had declared independence, and it was clear that within a few months the country would collapse. As a last-ditch effort to show that communist Russia could survive, the Soviet government organised the Monsters of Rock Festival in 1991. By the time Metallica was on stage, the crowd had grown to 1.6 million people. The government realised that they'd make a huge mistake by letting people come in for free. 1,000 Soviet Red Army soldiers were tasked with guarding the festival. The government had severely underestimated the popularity of the concert. It went about as well as you would imagine. Even after using a helicopter to try to control the crowd, the military was unsuccessful. Many soldiers began to defect to the side of the crowd. Riots broke out several times during the show, and the bands just kept playing. By the end of the festival, 51 people had died, a surprisingly low number when you consider everything that happened. None of the bands knew it, but the festival became a defining moment in the fall of the Soviet Union. Just a few months later, the country collapsed into the modern European states of Eastern Europe, and the Russian Federation was born. The concert still lives on in infamy as one of the highest attended and most influential concerts of all time.
They've never heard this before. This is the first.
This is beyond the dream. It's incredible to play a show.
I feel the same world over. Everybody has aggressions, and this form of music is the ultimate way to let out any bit of steam.
It's absolutely incredible.